Hello once again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Thursday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got, let's see, should be the hazardous weather graphic, and it is. A couple of flood advisories out. One is for, on the Kenai Peninsula there, is for the Kenai River from Ski-Lac Lake to Kenai, and that's out until 2:15 p.m. Sunday, and that's due to the incoming rain once again today, or tonight, tomorrow, and into Saturday. And minor flooding may occur along that stretch of the Kenai River, again from Ski-Lac Lake to Kenai. Could see some minor flooding in low-lying areas. And also a flood advisory out there for northeast Prince William Sound, which of course includes the Valdez area, the greater Valdez area. And that's out until Sunday afternoon. And that same thing, the excessive rainfall could produce minor flooding in low-lying areas. None of the rivers, I believe, are expected to surpass flood stage, but still some minor flooding could occur. And it looks like it'll be drying out late Saturday night, and Sunday will be a much drier day, kind of a period of drier weather coming up late in the weekend, later in the second half of the weekend, I'll say. Otherwise, 5-day outlook for Southeast Alaska, August 18th through 22nd. And of course, today, wind speeds decreased, and then for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, high temperatures will be above normal, reaching the 60s and 70s. And then on Monday, increasing rain and a chance of cooler temperatures. That'll be the trend into early next week. So looking pretty good there for the week. Looking like a really good weekend for the Panhandle coming up. And from there, looking at satellite imagery, you can see moisture sliding northward. Again, there over the into the Gulf of Alaska and right up into south central, right into the Copper River Basin. Not a lot of precipitation with that, although, well, Kodiak Island just had 1/100th of an inch of precipitation today. By contrast, Cordova picked up 1.5 inches, and Seward about 1/2 inch of rain there. And rain back into areas of Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula as that area kind of backs into the west there. And on the weather map today, you can see the Bering Sea system there bringing some gusty winds and rain, gale force winds out over the western Aleutians from the west and southwest, up to 40 knots out there, lighter winds for Adak and Atka, and more showery conditions. And then the rain and gusty winds along in advance of the front, Pribilof Islands down to the Fox Islands, and spreading into the Alaska Peninsula. Sunshine breaking out over the Bristol Bay area today, and a little bit up into the Kuskokwim Delta as well. And southern Cook Inlet saw some sun earlier today, sun breaks clearing a little bit there, but rain northern Cook Inlet, and showers up over the Susitna Valley, Madanuska Valley, showery kind of in the Copper River Basin with some gusty winds, Gulkana and Delta Junction, having gusts from the south 30 to 40 miles an hour this afternoon. So right along the Copper River there, and then in the normally windier areas on the lee side of the eastern Alaska Range, which Delta Junction definitely is. And then weak low up over the, just north of the upper Yukon Valley there, producing areas of rain for the eastern Brooks Range, the eastern Arctic coast, scattered showers over the North Slope and western Arctic coast. And then the clearing skies, nice day today over the Panhandle after the dense fog you had this morning, low clouds, gave way to a fair amount of sunshine during the afternoon hours. And for tonight, you may see those fog and low clouds probably will redevelop to some extent, whether it gets as bad as it was this morning. You have to wait and see. Weak trough right off the north coast could kick off a few light showers, but nothing significant in that area there as far as rainfall. Dry, light winds, very light winds for the Panhandle for tonight and tomorrow as well. Otherwise, area of rain continues over the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, right up into the Susitna and Madanuska Valley, and some of that spilling in as showers north of the Alaska Range, possibly into the mid-Tanana Valley. areas of rain, that weak low holding there over the eastern Brooks Range, so it keeps it damp and unsettled up in that area, the northeast part of the state to the eastern Arctic coast. And then the front spreading rain into Bristol Bay. Wind's not a real big factor with that, maybe 20 to 25 knots, marine-wise winds, a few higher gusts on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula out of the southeast, like a cold bay. And gale force westerlies there for those central Aleutians and back out toward Kiska Island as well with that tighter gradient there. Rain spreads up along the Yukon Delta coast. Some low clouds, fog, rain, and drizzle there with a very weak trough, St. Lawrence Island and Bering Strait. And then the forecast for Friday, tomorrow, next front pushing rain, Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay, as well as the southern Kuskokwim Valley and the Yukon Delta, and getting a little more intermittent as it tries to spread up to the, from the Kuskokwim Delta, it gets more intermittent as it spreads to the Yukon Delta. Hopefully a dry day for St. Lawrence Island with kind of a northeast wind flow there on the light side. Partly sunny skies in the central and northern interior south of the Brooks Range. Could even be a little bit of clearing possibly on the north slope as well. But the Arctic coast dry with light winds. Light winds on a panhandle there. That very weak trough keeps a chance of showers going on the north coast. Real hit and miss, probably more miss than hit, but the risk does exist. Otherwise, a partly to mostly sunny day, especially in the southern areas. Pretty good there over the whole area. And for the Gulf of Alaska, looking at high pressure and light winds there. And moving on to Saturday, look for rain. Again, that front kind of stationary, edges in toward Kodiak Island. Look for some rain, possibly moderate there, spreading into the Kenai Peninsula again, supporting those flood advisories, and also into Prince William Sound eventually, more likely Saturday night. Still pretty nice up over the interior, some sunshine there along the Kobuk, Koyukuk, and upper Yukon valleys, maybe even the Tanana Valley into the Copper River Basin, and partly to mostly sunny and mild for the Panhandle, with the Alaska Peninsula looking pretty good, or the Alaska Peninsula looking pretty wet. The western Aleutians looking pretty good with high pressure building in ahead of the next warm front out in that area. And moving on to lows for tonight, lower to mid 50s for the Panhandle, South Central Alaska, 45 to 50 for the lows, about 51 for Homer, and mid 40s for the Copper River Basin, near 50 for Bristol Bay, mid 50s for Kodiak Island. And Friday afternoon, look at the 70s over the southern southeast coast, 70, 75 down that way, mid 60s northern southeast coast, near 60 along the North Gulf Coast, but upper 50s Prince William Sound, lower 60s in the Copper River Basin, and in the 50s for South Central Alaska to Kodiak Island, near 60 for King Salmon, the Kuskokwim Valley, in the upper 50s. Lows Saturday morning, mid 40s there in the Copper River Basin, 40s to lower 50s there over the Kenai Peninsula and Cook Inlet, near 50 for the Kuskokwim Valley, lower 50s Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, and in the 50s for the Panhandle. And the highs Saturday afternoon, mid 60s for the Copper River Basin, otherwise 70 to 75 again. First day of the weekend, probably Sunday as well for the Panhandle, and mid to upper 60s to the north. And even warmer temperatures now, lower 60s for South Central Alaska, mid 60s Copper River Basin, and 58 to 62 Bristol Bay to the Kuskokwim Valley. Up to the north, lows 30s, Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, 40s south of the mountains there, and then highs for Friday afternoon in the upper 30s on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast and 40s on the west side. And for the area of the northern interior valleys, mostly in the 50s to lower 60s for the Tanana Valley, and mid 50s for the Seward Peninsula around Nome. And then the lows on Saturday morning, lower to mid 30s for the Arctic coast and North Slope, and again south of the Brooks Range, mid to upper 40s to near 50 in some locations, 40s for the Seward Peninsula, lower 40s for the St. Lawrence Island area. And then high Saturday afternoon, trying to push 70 in the Fairbanks area, otherwise, as well as the eastern interior from Eagle to Northway and Tok, but call it upper 60s, lower 60s there for the Kobuk Valley and Bettles area. 45 to 55 for the Brooks Range, and again, cool upper 30s for the highs for the central and eastern Arctic coast, 40s to the west, near 60 for Nome, as well as McGrath there. And for the southwest part of the state, Bering Sea, Aleutians, 40s to 50s for the lows tonight, with mid-40s for the Pribilofs. And then for Friday afternoon, 50s over the southwest interior, and again 60 near King Salmon. Mid-50s, mid to upper 50s, 57 for Unalaska, 53 out at Shimia. AKwx looking at 55 degrees, and St. Paul 53. And then the low Saturday morning, staying above 40 for St. Lawrence Island, mid-40s for the Pribilofs and the Aleutians, lower 50s for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. And for Saturday afternoon, lower 50s for the highs for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, 50s, mid-50s, lower 60s for Bristol Bay, and near 60 there for the Kuskokwim Valley, and the upper 50s, lower 60s, 62 call it for Bethel. And looking at the 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook there, you can see a little above normal, about 42% chance of south central Alaska staying above normal. So that would be probably a little drier than what we've seen, and about a 40% chance of it being above normal precipitation-wise up into the interior there.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather, some IFR, or a lot of IFR there from the north central interior up across the Brooks Range North Slope out to the Arctic coast, and then pretty solid IFR extending from the Bering Strait down to St. Lawrence and St. Matthew Islands. Pribilofs covering just about all of the Bering Sea, all of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, sliding on up into south central Alaska and into the Copper River Basin, central and southern Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, and along the north coast of the Panhandle, inside waters of the southeast coast, low clouds and fog, areas of marginal VFR there, and some VFR over the interior. And then for the the afternoon, tomorrow afternoon, central interior, St. Lawrence Island, eastward to Canada. We've got a pretty good VFR zone there. To the north, marginal VFR, Koyukuk, Kobuk Valley, northwest coast on out to the North Slope and Arctic coast with IFR for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. IFR now right along or just off the Panhandle coastline, becoming VFR over the inside waters. IFR for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and slipping northward there into Cook Inlet and along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range. Pretty good VFR, or pretty good IFR across Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and the eastern Bering Sea and southeast Bering Sea there, and then VFR in the interior. Saturday morning, VFR in the interior, Norton Sound, across the central part of the state. Best flying conditions will be there to start the weekend off, as well as the Panhandle. IFR, though, for the Yakutat area, and a couple of bands of IFR up into southern Alaska, one across Prince William Sound and southern Cook Inlet, and then the eastern and southern slopes of the Alaska Range there, with IFR for the Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, and lingering IFR northern Seward Peninsula through the strait there down to St. Lawrence Island, and IFR southeast Bering Sea, Pribilofs, eastern Aleutians, Atka to Alaska Peninsula for the afternoon. IFR kind of split out there over the Bering Sea with a swath of VFR between or near Atka and AKwx, and then IFR Fox Islands, Pribilofs, north through the Bering Strait again, IFR eastern Arctic coast and North Slope, VFR interior Alaska, especially north of the Alaska Range, still lower conditions south of the mountains there, marginal VFR southern Copper River Basin, IFR holding off the Panhandle there, off the coast or right along with VFR inside waters, Kodiak Island IFR, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Passes, Anatuvik and Adigan, both looking marginal for the day on Friday, and for Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR, especially on the eastern entrance of both passes, IFR eastern entrance are rainy, otherwise marginal VFR, and for Windy, marginal VFR south entrance, and Isabel, marginal VFR, but better conditions on the north approach into the valley. And for Mentasta, marginal VFR south side, otherwise not too bad, possibly on the southern entrance. Tanita looks kind of marginal at times tomorrow, and Portage, it looks IFR. And for Chilcoot and White, starting out marginal early on, then becoming VFR. And for the freezing level, 4,000 feet, central eastern Arctic coast, 6,000 feet there, all the way down into Cook Inlet, and then 10 to 12,000 feet over the southeast Bering Alaska Peninsula and the Panhandle. Icing, another load of moisture coming in, moving northeastward there with some considerable moderate, couple of zones, Kodiak Island, Iliamna Lake pushing into Cook Inlet, otherwise isolated moderate there over the southwest interior, back to the Pribilofs down into the central Aleutians. And looking at the jet stream, 75 knot southwest winds pushing that moisture northeastward, the stronger 110 knot jet with the upper low now into Canada and the Yukon. Deep trough out over the Bering Sea, next system out there. The strongest winds, though, south of the Aleutians, otherwise southerlies 40 knots coming up along the western Alaska Range. Southeast 50 knot winds at 3,000 feet coming across the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, and then diminishing as they move into the Yukon Delta. North 50 knots over the Aleutians. And pretty light variable winds, though, over the remainder of the state, Arctic coast down into the interior, Gulf of Alaska, and Panhandle. Looking at turbulence, surface to 7,000 feet for considerable moderate there. Southwest Alaska into southern Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, as well as all of the Aleutians, surface to 6,000 feet. After the break, I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Hey howdy Mercurial members of the stargazing community. Mercury is tough to see at the best of times, but this week it reaches its highest evening altitude of the season ahead of the Great Elongation East next week. Hit the twilight just as the sun is setting, and after 9 p.m. you'll see a faint dot following the sun below the horizon. That is our innermost planet, Tiny Mercury. Planets closer to the sun are easiest to see when furthest from the sun on their orbit from our perspective. This is called elongation, and next week Mercury will reach its greatest elongation. This happens pretty regularly with Merc because of its short 88-day orbit. Once Mercury dips below the horizon, there are some great stars to see, like bright blue Spica. Get outside, relish that late summer sky, and keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
You have a lot of pilots. In
Yeah.
fact, it's, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft.
No.
Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid, and that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft, and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer, there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops, or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, you know, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You know, you can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
You know, it's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we have had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. The winds don't get any lighter than this out along the coastline of the Panhandle. They're variable 5 knots. Seas running 4 feet over the inside waters. Lynn Canal, north winds at 10 knots and northwest at 10 for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. And then for the second day of the week, or first day of the weekend, Saturday, still light winds from the north-northwest at 10 knots on the north coast and north-northwest at 10 knots on the south coast. Seas running 4 to 5 feet. Then over toward Middleton Island, you see it swinging around to the southeast at 15. Otherwise, Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, central northern inner channels, southeast winds on average at about 10 knots. Clarence Strait, variable to northwest, wind at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And for Prince William Sound, southeast winds 10 knots, and the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast at 10, southeast 15 for the western North Gulf Coast. Small craft advisories, though, for the Barren Islands, southeast winds 30 knots and east winds at 30 knots for Kamishak Bay. Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. For Saturday, Cook Inlet, still northeast 15 to 20 knots with 4 to 5 foot seas, and small craft advisories continue for Kamishak Bay. East at 30 knots with seas at 8 feet, 8 foot seas and 25 knots. Southeast winds for the Barren Islands. North Gulf Coast, east winds 20 knots, and Prince William Sound, light northeast breeze at 10. Kodiak Island, east-southeast winds Friday at 20 to 25 knots, seas up to 8 feet. And for the Alaska Peninsula, south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots. Bristol Bay, southeast winds 20 knots. And for Saturday, Bristol Bay, east winds at 20 knots. And for the Bering Sea side, the Alaska Peninsula winds will be northeast at 15. And the Pacific side, southeast winds 15 knots, seas about 9 feet. Kodiak Island, east-northeast winds, 25 knots with 5 to 9 foot seas. For the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, south to southwest winds, 25 to 30 knots with seas running 9 to as high as 16 feet. Central Aleutians, gale warning, southwest 35 knots, seas as high as 20 feet. Gale warnings for the western Aleutians. Northwest winds, 35 knots, 16 to 20 foot seas. For Saturday, lighter winds out over the western Aleutians, Shimei at Akiska south at 20, Amchitka Island northwest 25, central Aleutians And the Fox Islands from Adak eastward there to Unalaska, winds will be northwest at 30 knots with seas running 10 to 14 feet. Pribilofs on Friday, southeast winds 15 knots with 8-foot seas. Southwest coast, small craft advisories, east winds 25 knots, 5 to 7-foot seas. And St. Matthew Island, northeast winds 30 knots, seas 11 feet. Northeast winds 20 knots for St. Lawrence Island with 5-foot seas. And for Saturday, small craft advisory, St. Lawrence Island, north winds 25 knots, north winds 20 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, northeast at 15 for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, and for the Pribilofs, northwest winds 30 knots, north 30 knots for the St. Matthew Island zone. For the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, look for north to northeast winds at 10 knots, seas about 3 feet. Western Arctic coast northeast at 20, and then east at 20 from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson. Cape Thompson to Wales, light east winds at 10 knots. And for Saturday, 20-knot winds from Wales to Cape Thompson from the north and northeast. Cape Beaufort up the west side there, east at 20. Central and eastern Arctic coast, northeast winds 10 knots, up to 15 knots from Kaktovik, Barter Island to Demarcation Point. And for tonight, weak low up over the eastern Brooks Range keeps it kind of damp and unsettled there over the eastern Arctic coast down in toward Arctic Village. Otherwise, not too bad, drying out there over the southwest interior ahead of that next front pushing rain and wind into the Alaska Peninsula. Rain spreading into Bristol Bay throughout the night, and southerly flow keeps surges of light rain, fog, and drizzle into the North Gulf Coast, south central Alaska. Drying out staying dry over the Panhandle. Could see low clouds and fog once again forming. And for tomorrow, just a risk of some showers along the north coast there with that weak trough off just sitting off the coast. Otherwise, partly and mostly sunny with mild temperatures, 60s and lower 70s. Dry over the northern part of the state as rain moves into the southwest interior. Kodiak Island starts spreading, becomes a little more widespread here, south central Alaska, and eventually Prince William Sound. And more of the same on Saturday. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.